thought to myself, by telling my story, I had this enormous amount of power. And if I was willing to use that power, I could change things. And so when I got to Harvard Law School as a professor a few years later, I was teaching criminal law, and I said, why doesn't anybody teach rape? And somebody said, well, we're not sure it's interesting enough. I thought, interesting enough? We spent 2 weeks on larceny by trick, you know, and you're wondering if rape is interesting enough. And nobody ever taught rape until I started doing it. And then I wrote my tenure piece on rape. And people came up to me and said, you gotta be out of your mind. You're going up for tenure writing a feminist version of a rape article that begins with the story of your own rape. And I thought, yes, that is what I'm gonna do. And late one night, I got word that the Harvard Law Review was gonna reject my tenure piece because of the tone of the first section. And my friends on the faculty got together that night and called the editor-in-chief of the Harvard University Press and said, we need you to accept a book tonight. And she said, a book tonight? Yeah, a book about rape. She said, I need 2 peer reviews. And first Larry Tribe got on the phone. He was the first peer review. And then Phil Hyman, another of my colleagues, who became Deputy Attorney General, he got on the phone. And she accepted it that night, and the next morning everybody said, where are you going to publish your tenure piece? I said, it's going to be a book in the Harvard University Press. So I had good friends along the way. That's the other thing, Michael. I mean, nobody does it alone, okay? Mm-hmm. Some people say they did it alone.
Nobody does
that just means they weren't looking, okay? And weren't thanking people. And I think nobody does it alone. And I think for that reason, you have an obligation if you're trying to open doors for yourself once you get inside to keep opening them. And the thing I hate most, it's my line actually, Katie Couric quoted me, I think, before Madeleine Albright. They have it, but it's about the special place in hell for women who don't help other women. I really think it horrifies me sometimes when I see women my age who had to pay heavy dues. I mean, look, we paid heavy dues. And there were things you gave up. And I consider myself very blessed because I have 2 children. But I know a lot of women my age
who made that sacrifice.
Who just, there was no way to do it. It was really hard to do. I wish I had a happy marriage. That I don't have. Lots of people sacrifice that. We had to pay heavy dues, but if anything, that's all the more reason to extend a helping hand and to say it really shouldn't be so hard. And yes, it still is a patriarchy, but there's at least a few of us sometimes who are in a position to nudge things one way or another. And we've got an obligation to keep nudging, keep pushing.
Mm-hmm. So with this Harvard Law Review comes many, many opportunities.
Right.
I want to talk about how it begins the intersection of your life and politics.
Well, because I was clerking in the Supreme Court and everybody was interviewing for jobs. And one of my old professors, Steve Breyer, is now in the U.S. Supreme Court.
A justice on the United States Supreme Court.
But back then, he was about to become chief counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The chief counsel at the time was a guy named David Boies, who's one of the most famous lawyers in America. So as between them, they had one person they could hire as a special assistant. So they offered me the job. And so in the summer of 1979, I went across the street from the U.S. Supreme Court and I went to work for Ted Kennedy, who at that time was the toast of Washington. And there was literally a line outside his office of Democrats coming in saying you have to run for president. Because
against then President Jimmy Carter.
Then much hated incumbent Democratic President Jimmy Carter.
Not a popular guy. Interest rates were through the roof. Unemployment was through the roof. The misery index, remember that?
Yep. And there weren't too many women on Ted Kennedy's staff in those days. It was post-Chappaquiddick, and there had been
sort of an unspoken rule that they didn't want women leaning over, whispering into the senator's ear. So when it came time to staff up the campaign, which was about 20 minutes after I got there, I got there and 20 minutes later, they're saying, well, who wants to go to the campaign? And I said, oh, heck, I'd like to go work for a presidential campaign. That would be really fun. So the deal was I had to finish the trucking deregulation report for David Boies before I was allowed to leave. I've never written a report about something I knew less about more quickly in my life than trucking deregulation. I still wonder.
Power of motivation.
Very big motivation. So I go over to the Kennedy campaign, to the issue staff. All right.
Now, Ted Kennedy is then going to take on an incumbent Democratic president.
But he's way ahead in the polls. He's, on his way to the White House. And there I am.
They return to Camelot.
And there I am at my desk. I've got a desk in this old Cadillac headquarters. And we all watched that terrible Roger Mudd interview.
Yes.
Then the hostages
Roger Mudd asks,
why do you want to be president?
He didn't have a good answer.
He didn't have a good answer.
Did not have a good answer.
And we're watching it, and I'm thinking, oh my God, we haven't even opened up this campaign, and we're sunk. But I'm there, and I have to. And then the hostages got taken, and Carter announced in Iran, right? And Carter announced he wasn't going to leave the White House to campaign. But the amazing thing about a losing campaign is the incredible opportunity it provides to somebody who doesn't have a lot of material needs. About the third week of the campaign, there was an event in town for the Lesbian and Gay Task Force, which was at that point a newly emerging group in the Democratic Party scene. And Jerry Brown was also running for president.
Yes, Jerry Brown was the governor of California then as well as currently.
Yeah. And the word was he was going to go to this event. And the word was that Jimmy Carter was going to send one of his sons. So who was going to represent Ted Kennedy? Well, they must have gone through the entire mishpacha, as we say in Jewish, the whole family.
The whole Rolodex.
Of all the Kennedy cousins.
That's a long list.
That's a very long list. Somebody comes around to my desk about 5 o'clock and says, you cover these issues, don't you? Well, sure, I covered all those issues in those days. I had women's rights, I had gay rights, I had urban development, I had a whole range.
And plus you were there.
And I'm sitting in my desk, and I'm the only girl sitting in the room. And they said, are you free tonight? I said, am I free tonight? Now, you gotta understand, I'm 26 years old. Yeah, I'm free tonight. What else am I gonna be doing? Could I go to the Lesbian and Gay Task Force and represent Senator Kennedy? I said, well, I could. I said, and this is the critical point, Michael, I didn't say, what do I say? How were they going to know what I was going to say? I'd have to come up with what do I say. I said, who do I say I am? Right?
It's a good book title.
Right? Who do I say I am? I know what to say. I'm going to say we're for equality, right? Mm-hmm. Who do I say I am? And whoever from the press office was getting ready to send me said, say you're the Deputy National Issues Director. I said, okay, that sounds very good. I walk over to this event, sounds good. Never thinking I'll get to use it. Somebody asked me who I am. People as I'm coming in, I'm the Deputy National Issues Director. The next morning, the Washington Post shows a big picture of Jerry Brown, whoever Carter sent, who was not his son, but some cabinet person, and me, the Deputy National Issues Director of the Kennedy campaign.
In the Washington Post.
In the Washington Post. And every single man in the issue staff walks in the next morning and says, since when is she the Deputy National Issues Director? If she's Deputy National Issues Director, and she is the bottom of this totem pole here. So we had 11 Deputy National Issues Directors that day, but none of the others got in the press. But what happened to me in the Kennedy campaign is the story of losing campaigns. I got to do everything by the end. I mean, people dropped off. Anybody who hadn't needed an income.
Because the campaign
the campaign was losing staff.
And then you'd lose staff.
And you lose staff, and if you're determined.
And you have no material need.
And I had my student loans. I used to write them letters saying, I am no longer, perhaps you've read in the paper, the Kennedy campaign is not doing very well. Well, that speaks for me, right? I'm not doing very well either. I did pay off my student loans. I was a tenured professor at Harvard when I came over and gave them the last check to pay them off. But because it was a losing campaign, I moved up and all over the place. I ended up in New Jersey running rabbis and Jews and driving vans, and I ended up all over the place. And then when the spring came, I ended up traveling with Senator Kennedy and running the platform committee and going into the convention, running the boiler room.
What type of retail politician was Senator Kennedy?
Amazing. And I just, you know, I look back and that campaign, everything was wrong with it. It was an incumbent president. We lost Iowa. You know, he gave terrible interviews at the beginning. My God, we'd had Chappaquiddick, the accident in which one of the boiler room girls died. I mean, the garbage we had to deal with in that campaign. And yet there were moments standing in the back of the room.
You gave a great speech at the convention.
I stood in the Pennsylvania delegation and cried. And I have a signed copy of it upstairs. There were moments when I felt as happy in a job, and that what I was doing was the right thing for me to be doing right then. I think I felt it more then than I've ever felt since.
Was he stunned by the loss of that campaign?
He was hurt by it, but he was also freed by it, I think, liberated. He put himself out there. He got the shit kicked out of him, and he got up and he kept fighting. And I think there was enormous dignity by the end of that campaign.